Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast, where I give you practical Stoic advice for modern times. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Simon Drew. I also do one-on-one mindset coaching, and you can book in your first free consultation by going to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching. On Facebook, you can join my group, the Practical Stoic Mastermind. But for now, enjoy this episode. Hi there, my name's Simon Drew, and welcome to the Practical Stoic Podcast. And today I'm taking a bit of a detour from our usual format. So usually I'll do my own written episode at the start of the week, then I'll have the Wednesday podcast today, and then I'll have an interview for you at the end of the week. But this week I actually have two interviews with you, two guests on the show, and I would love to share them with you. So today I'm doing our first guest for this week, and it's Ward Farnsworth. And so I'll give you a little bit of background here. Ward is the Dean of the University of Texas School of Law. He was educated at Wesleyan University and the University of Chicago, and he has taught previously at Boston University. He's written about a wide range of subjects, as we will hear, but his latest book is called The Practicing Stoic, which presents the original teachings of the ancient Stoics in their own words, but in a format and organization that resembles what you might find in a modern course on the subject. And so a lot of what we'll be talking about today is actually the book that he's written. And he sent me a copy, and I just want to emphasize how much I absolutely love this book. I mean, even just first from picking it up when I first got it in the mail, you know, it feels like a book and it looks like a book that you want to have on your shelf in a very important place where you can get access to any time of the day whenever you need that Stoic inspiration. And in terms of the contents of the book, what Ward has done is he's basically compiled all of the best teachings of Stoicism and put them into categories within this book so that you can go to any category, whatever you're dealing with in your life right now, and you can get the right information and inspiration that you need in that moment. And in my opinion, this book really does serve as the perfect introduction to Stoicism, as well as, you know, a really good resource for anybody who is already well versed in Stoicism and knows about the principles but just wants to go a little bit deeper. So I don't want to talk about it anymore because I just absolutely love this book, and I really do want you all to go out and pre-order it because it's coming out in the middle of June, so next month, but you can pre-order it on Amazon, and I'll have the links here. But look, I just want to get straight into the interview because there's so much value in this interview. There are so many good points that you guys can take away that will allow you to live a better life with Stoicism. So without any further ado, I present to you Ward Farnsworth. All right, so Ward, I've been so excited to have you on the show. You know, ever since you reached out and you know, sent me your book, I've just been really excited to talk to you. It seems like you've had a really interesting career in law, and you know, I've already told everybody a little bit about yourself. So I guess we'd like to hear it from you. So why don't you tell my audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Okay. Well, first of all, Simon, thanks so much for having me on this great podcast of yours. I appreciate the chance to speak with you and to tell your readers a little bit about this book in hopes they might find it to be of interest. As for me, yeah, I'm the dean of the University of Texas Law School, so I'm an administrator and also a professor of law. And in my scholarship, I have written about a lot of different sorts of things that probably look unrelated, although I think of them as actually being related pretty snugly. So, in addition to just ordinary legal scholarship, I've done some writing about classical rhetoric, metaphor, even about chess. And to me, these are all sort of aspects of the life of the mind, and all of these projects have some similarities of format.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess I'd like to, you know, I want to talk about all of these different areas of your life that kind of come together. And you know, I want to talk about the Stoicism. I also want to talk about your career in law and, you know, in the university. But I guess for now, what's really on my mind is like, how did you get involved in Stoicism? I guess sometimes I ask people like, what is your conversion story?
Oh, well, it's not so abrupt as all that. I think my story is a lot like a lot of people's, though, is that I came across it in early life. I think a lot of people will stumble across Marcus Aurelius when they're teenagers or in college or somewhere like that, which is how it was for me, and discover that there's a lot to love about what he had to say. And then you are passed a copy of Epictetus, and that ends up staying with you, and you accumulate these things. And so for the last 20 years, I've just found that in my reading, the Stoics are the ones who I find most congenial as just as sources of advice and comments on the big picture of how to live one's life. So one thing led to another for me in my interest in them. And then meanwhile, I've written these other books, as I mentioned. Your listeners are probably not familiar with what I've written about rhetoric or metaphor, but those books look just like the Stoicism book that I've written. These are all efforts to systematize some knowledge, especially some ancient knowledge, that I think is interesting and helpful now, and that isn't as widely or broadly understood as I might wish.
And honestly, I'm going to get into your book soon, and I'll mention this again, but something that I do really love about your book is it kind of allows people to get an insight into Stoicism that they wouldn't otherwise get by just looking at each separate Stoic work. You kind of put it into categories, and then you bring the best. You're kind of taking the best advice from the Stoics and making it extremely accessible. And I really, really love that about what you've done.
Well, thank you, Simon. I'm grateful for that, and that's what the book tries to do. Maybe I should say a word briefly about what the book is.
Please,
for listeners who haven't had a chance to see it. So the book is an effort to take what the original ancient Stoics said and systematize it and present it as if it were lessons. Those of you or those of your listeners who've spent time reading Seneca or Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius, who of course are the three ancient Stoics who left the largest amount of surviving work for us to read. If you read them, you find that I think that their writings are very interesting, often full of useful thoughts, but that it's not arranged in a way that's very well organized or helpful in its format for us now. So Marcus Aurelius left behind his meditations, which are basically his journals. And they just read like journal entries. They're what he was thinking about. And there's to me, a lot of charm and interest in that. But if you want to see Stoicism as a whole, it doesn't really, the journals don't really help you do that. Same thing with Epictetus's discourses. They're just notes from classes he taught, and they're not organized by topic or anything like that. So I tried to take what they all wrote and put it under 12 headings, and then put what each of them said about each heading and each subheading next to each other so you can compare it. So if you want to read about what the Stoics thought on the subject of externals, or on the subject of perspective or death or reputation or adversity or any topic, you can see those topics divided up in a way that I hope is rational and helpful. And then you can compare, okay, here's what Epictetus said about it, and here's what Marcus Aurelius said about it, and here's what Seneca said about it. And so this makes the philosophy easier to digest, and it also allows you to compare what they each said and sort of let the different Stoics talk to each other. So that's the niche the book tries to fill. Obviously, one can always go back now and read the originals. You don't need my book for that. And there are also lots of books now that try to summarize or restate Stoicism just in purely modern language. This book is sort of something between those two. It's an effort to let the originals speak for themselves, but to do it in a format that's more accessible than the writings alone are.
And honestly, that's something that I have also thoroughly enjoyed about this book, is the fact that, there are many books out there that will talk about Stoicism and the lessons of Stoicism, and it will teach these principles. However, sometimes I really like going back to the original works. There's something about just reading straight from the Stoics that really connects with me on a deeper level than what I would receive if I was just reading about what they said. And so what you've done here is you've mixed both worlds, and you've said, okay, I'm going to be teaching these lessons, but along the way, you're going to be hearing from Seneca, and then Marcus Aurelius, and then Epictetus all together, and you're going to get the best of their information. And even what I love about what you've done as well is you've brought people into the mix who maybe aren't necessarily Stoics that we know of, but they've talked about Stoicism. So you'll include quotes from them or people who have considered themselves to be Stoics throughout history, and I absolutely love that.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm with you. I think that reading the originals is more interesting than reading modern restaters of the originals. The people who've restated Stoicism are often very talented and interesting, but the original writers about it, I think, were very brilliant, and that's why the work has survived so well. I mean, if you can read an insight expressed by Marcus Aurelius, wouldn't you rather do it that way than by somebody saying it now? Partly because it's so interesting to hear somebody talking 2,000 years ago in language that's still so applicable now. The way I put it in the book is that truth improves with age. There's something about seeing a great insight expressed not last week, but 20 centuries ago, that really adds to its heft. I mean, if it made that much sense then and it makes that much sense now, you've got something good. So I think if you have the opportunity to learn straight from the founders of the philosophy, that's generally more interesting and to be preferred. It's just that they don't always write it as accessibly as one might like. And I've used the book to try to make it more accessible. Now, as you mentioned, there are some others who aren't quite as ancient in the book. So the way the book works is it tries to identify Stoic ideas. And so if Marcus Aurelius said it, I'm prepared to treat it as a Stoic idea. But once you have a Stoic idea, I'm open to presenting elaborations on it or restatements of it by writers who came later, like Montaigne, the French essayist, or Samuel Johnson, the English lexicographer and essayist, or Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, Adam Smith. There are a few others, occasionally Shakespeare. But the point is that once you become a student of a Stoic idea, I think it's interesting to see what others have done with it. If how the ideas lived on in philosophical and literary life since then. That's part of what it means to be a student of the idea. It's not only to want to understand it, but to see what other great literary figures have done with the idea and how they've expressed it. So woven in along with Seneca and the others I've mentioned are these somewhat more recent figures, not all that recent, but instead of being 20 centuries old, maybe they're 4 or 5 centuries old, depending who it is.
Yeah, I love it. And it really it gives you a whole new insight into Stoicism. And even by the name, I'm sure after you found out the name of my podcast, you would have known that your book was going to be a good fit for me because it's called The Practicing Stoic. It's obviously about, how can I use this philosophy in my life? And I guess I'd like to go to you now in your life. Like, I would love to know what do you feel like have been the most helpful Stoic practices throughout your life?
Oh, well, I will answer, but I'll just also mention that it's not just the title of the book, right? The Stoicism is a very elaborate philosophy, and this book is just about the aspects of it that I think are most practically useful as a matter of ethics, by which, of course, they meant just how to live your life. So there's not a lot of metaphysics in the book. It's more about how to think about the problems we all have to deal with related to. How do you think about money? How do you think about emotion and adversity and what others think? And so topics like that, the most practical ones. But to come around to your question, so I just think that Stoicism provides the most helpful framework for dealing with the ordinary challenges of life, which I think is something a lot of people have thought who read it. I mean, in the preface, I say, I don't even know if the book amounts to Stoicism in full because it leaves out a lot of the first principles the Stoics would have thought were very important. So it might just be the practical teachings of these very wise people who we remember. But if you wanted wise advice about how to manage the ordinary difficulties of life, I don't think you could do better than these advisors who I think had a wonderful knowledge of human nature. I mean, they probably thought of themselves not quite that way, but as deep students of larger themes. They thought that nature was infused with reason. It's not something most of us think now. But my view is the reason the Stoicism has survived and still has followers and people who enjoy it and find it helpful, it's not because their views of the universe still have takers. It's because their insights about human nature were so keen. They understood the human mind very well, far in advance of a lot of modern psychologists who end up revisiting many of the same ideas from different angles. And so having them in mind when you're dealing with the problems that come across, that come in your way every day, I think is a great help.
No, I completely agree. And, I might move in a different direction now because, you've had a lot of chance to actually study so much about Stoicism, and study all of these works and compile it into this awesome book that can help us to live a good life. But, I think that a lot of people have misconceptions about Stoicism and what it is and what it means.
Yes.
What do you think are some misconceptions that people have, and what have you sort of done to kind of remedy those misconceptions within yourself or other people?
Yeah, wow. Well, there sure are a lot of them. So obviously, as everybody knows who takes an interest in the subject, the first problem you have is just the ordinary English modern meaning of the word Stoic, which doesn't have very much to do with the ancient variety, but there's no way to rename it at this late date. But people think of Stoics as being often as humorless and unfeeling, and I think that's got nothing to do with it. I think a Stoic's more likely to be distinguished by a sort of mild humor in the face of things other people regard as grim. And when it comes to feeling, the Stoics actually endorse openly certain kinds of feeling for other people. There are what they would consider extremes of it, or emotional reactions they think are unhelpful. But I think if you actually read the Stoics and take them in full, which the book tries to help the reader do, I think you can see their approach is a very humane and generally a very realistic one. It's not. There's nothing grim about it, and it's also not a philosophy free from compassion, which is a criticism sometimes made of it. The last chapter of the book just takes 3 standard criticisms of the Stoics, and I've taken them from reputable sources, from other literary figures who've trashed the Stoics for one reason or another, and considers whether what they say has merit. You get somebody complaining that Stoicism advocates a lack of compassion, and I try to show from what the Stoics actually said how you can understand their approach to life in a way that is quite the contrary. It's a philosophy where compassion is a very important feature.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, it's funny that we're talking about this because my last podcast episode was all about how the Stoics think about compassion, and how it is actually an important part of the philosophy. Because I got an email from somebody saying, well, these 4, pillars of Stoicism, they don't really take into account compassion, and so is there room for compassion in Stoicism? And the answer is, of course, absolutely yes. I mean, I talked about how Seneca would often talk about how cruel it was what they were doing in the Colosseums, or then you'd think about Marcus Aurelius, who believed that everybody was connected in some way. So we should, we should act as if how we're treating other people is how we're treating ourselves, and
exactly.
There's so many beautiful examples of the Stoics using compassion, and that's why I don't really agree with just giving Stoicism, these 4 pillars of the courage, justice, temperance, and self-discipline, and because there's so much more to it. There's so much more to Stoicism than what people currently think.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think. And I think one difficulty with the Stoics is they said so much that was memorable that often people don't read all of it. What they remember about Stoicism is something arresting they read, like some line that really seemed remarkable to them. And then they think that's what it's all about, and they don't take the time to see how that one striking thing, for better or worse, was offset or elaborated on or qualified somewhere else in their writings. So the book tries to help with that. And so in the chapter on virtue, there's a whole section on compassion and related ideas with lots of examples of them saying very explicitly this is an essential part of the philosophy, is that to be a good Stoic, to live virtuously, means living for others. It means putting the needs of the community ahead of your own personal needs, and to reaching out to your fellow humans with compassion and fellow feeling and so forth. And I think some people might find that surprising, because what they've heard about Stoicism reputation is that it's all about other things, maybe the points you mentioned, which are also part of it. But I think if you see it as a whole, you see the different things they said about different aspects of the philosophy, not just how to think about emotion and adversity, but also what the practice of virtue really means. It ends up being a very attractive picture, and I think a much more attractive picture than some people have gathered from the scraps they've picked up here and there.
I completely agree. And I've said this many times on my podcast, but I feel like people focus too much on the part of Stoicism that says you shouldn't be hurt, and that if you're hurt by somebody's words, then it's based on your opinions of what they said.
Right.
And there is so much truth to that. However, people focus on that before they focus on the part of Stoicism that says you shouldn't seek to hurt people. And so they will go out there and they will say things, and they will, for example, you'll see on Facebook groups all the time people having discussions about Stoicism, and people just throwing, horrible comments from left to right with this view of Stoicism that says that it doesn't matter what I say because if they're offended, then it's their fault. But Stoicism is so much bigger than that. And that's why I'm so proud of like my community that I'm building here, because within my community, especially on Facebook, nobody is angry at anybody. Nobody's trying to put people down. We're all just sharing ideas, talking about it in a kind way, because we understand, and I'm trying to push it out there, that Stoicism isn't about just living for yourself and expecting everybody to take what you say in a good way. It's about also being kind, being compassionate.
Right.
I'm sure you'd agree.
Oh, I would. I think a good way to think of it is that you try to be slow to give offense and slow to take offense, and I think that usually keeps one in good stead. And I think I'd like to think that's what you would find if you had the pleasure of spending time with good old Marcus Aurelius, but I suppose we don't know that. In any
Absolutely.
event, I'm with you.
And so you mentioned Marcus Aurelius there. I guess I'd like to know who has been your favorite Stoic to go to? Like which Stoic, even if it's not one of the original three that we kind of read from now, who's given you the most inspiration?
Well, it depends. One thing the book claims is when you line up what the Stoics each said on a given topic, you discover there are many topics where they all comment. So if you want to read about externals, every Stoic philosopher talks about it, and it's fun to see, or at least I think interesting to compare what they all had to say. But they each had specialties. So you turn to one of them more than the others for this or that. If you want to read about externals, that's really Epictetus's specialty. Is something he talks about more than any of the others do. If you're interested in psychology, I think that's Seneca's area, that if you want to compare what they all had to say about the psychology of the emotions, it's Seneca who had more and deeper things to say about that than the others did, because it was more of a focus for him. And for Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the art of perspective, of point of view, is his. But when it comes to the pleasure of reading, I must say that Montaigne, who I mentioned, I think is somebody who, if your listeners haven't had the pleasure of exploring, would probably enjoy very much. Now, he was referred to at one time as the French Seneca when he was writing his essays.
Wow.
He, in fairness, I wouldn't quite call him a Stoic, and he wouldn't have called himself that. He was more skeptical on large issues, and so there are ways in which he doesn't subscribe to Stoicism. But on the practical questions the book deals with, he's very Stoic a lot of the time, and a lot of what he says is just elaboration on Stoic ideas. So, for example, there's the Stoic idea you mentioned a minute ago about anger, that you don't react to things in the world, you react to your thoughts about them, or to your opinions or judgments about them. And the book treats that as principle number one of the practice of Stoicism. And if you find that idea interesting, and I think anybody who's interested in Stoicism must, because it's so foundational, and and one reason it grabs you is that it's counterintuitive. And once you grasp that idea, it has a lot of applications. But if you get interested in that idea, Montaigne has a whole long essay about it that is a more extended treatment of that exact thought than any one ancient Stoic ever did. I mean, the Stoics mention this point here and there, and it's obviously very important to them. But Montaigne goes on about it for probably several thousand words with all sorts of examples and exploring, is it true in this case? Is it true in that case? So if you want a companion to really dig into that idea with, I think Montaigne is the best you're going to do. And so I think he's an underrated resource for the Stoic, even understanding that he himself might not qualify fully as a Stoic. But then again, a lot of your listeners, most of us, probably don't qualify fully as Stoics. We're interested. We take what we find helpful from it. And there are those who might fully announce themselves as Stoics, but I think for most of us, it's just a great resource. And I think Montaigne is very useful in exactly that spirit.
Yeah, and I think this brings up a good point, which is that, we don't just have to get our inspiration with Stoicism from the Stoics. There are so many other people out there, and even in modern times, there are people who have been heavily influenced by Stoicism who we can learn from. Even recently, last week, I had somebody on the podcast who really hadn't done a lot of study into Stoicism, but based on his story, I knew that he could teach us things about his life that could help us to live a more Stoic life. And so there are people out there who we can learn from who aren't necessarily the Stoics. And on that note, I think it's important that we all recognize that we can explore these ideas and add to the philosophy. And that's what a lot of people are doing these days. That's why I'm so excited to be talking to different people on this podcast, because there are people out there exploring the ideas of Stoicism and picking them apart and saying, well, this works and this doesn't and this works. So putting it all together. And I absolutely love that. And I guess I would really like to, speaking of all this, applying Stoicism to our life and different perspectives of Stoicism, I'd like to move into your career in law, because I'd be really interested to hear from you. Like, how do you think Stoicism has impacted your career in law?
Well, I don't know if it's impacted directly my career, but it does have some influence on my teaching, because when you're teaching in a law school, at least in this country, there's this great emphasis on helping students learn how to think like lawyers. And the question is, what does that mean? Because it could sound like a not very nice thing to do, is to think like a lawyer, but we think of it as a good thing. And what I mean by it, and of course many professors have different views, but it's really the art of learning to look at problems from many different points of view or perspectives other than the immediately self-interested one that most people bring to every problem they encounter. And that, I think, is actually a skill that Stoicism develops heavily, because that's Stoicism has an analytical side, which is all about rationally and logically analyzing people's reactions to things like money and reputation. But it also has an intuitive side, which just involves helping people look at ordinary events and externals from unexpected points of view, looking at them from way far in the future, looking back on them, or looking at them from far above, or looking at them as other people would look at them, looking at things that happen to you as you would see them if they happened to somebody else. All these perspective maneuvers are a big part of Stoicism. It's a certain facility or agility at not just seeing things as we would by default, but deliberately learning how to look at things from other points of view that tends to release some of the grip they have on you, or some of the grip that the most immediate reaction has on you. And that's something that I think good lawyers have to be able to do, because you're brought a crisis by your client, you're brought a problem, and all they can do is see it from their point of view. And your job is to see it as the other side is going to see it, to see it as the judge is going to see it if it ever goes to court, to help your client perhaps see it as they're going to see it when a little more time has passed. And that's one of the claims of the book, and that's maybe an example of what you said a minute ago about trying to contribute some additional thoughts to it. My own view is that the perspective that the Stoics often try to bring to adversity or to emotion is the perspective that we would come to naturally with just the passage of time and with lots of experience. So if you hear about the Stoic, how does a Stoic handle a great provocation to anger? One way to look at it is, well, they what they want to do in effect is handle it like somebody would handle it if they'd had the same provocation 1,000 times. I mean, if you've experienced a provocation to anger 1,000 times, you're unlikely to get very emotional about it when you have to turn 1001, because experience tends to soften your reaction to these things, and you've seen it before. I don't mean you don't care. You probably still feel things, and hopefully you take action about it. And one thing the book claims is that's how good doctors and good lawyers deal with different kinds of adversity. You go to a lawyer with a serious problem, and they do care, but they don't get emotional about it, because you're not the first time they've seen this. They've seen it 1,000 times. So they're able to treat you with empathy. They're able to feel. They're able to be compassionate, but they don't get carried off by emotion, because no veteran gets carried off by emotion. And Stoicism, in effect, is a kind of shortcut to the veteran's mindset, I think, with respect to many different aspects of life. And so in the law, that's part of what you're trying to do, is give the student in 3 years something of the experience and mindset of a veteran, by giving them lots of vicarious experience of cases and problems people have been through, so they can handle them with perspective when they confront them in real life.
I love that. There's so much good insight in what you just said there. I mean, even for me, like, I was thinking when you're talking about having an argument or some sort of something is happening that you'll experience this many times in the future, and you've experienced it before. Like, I kind of thought, okay, so let's say that I'm having an argument now with somebody. If I can picture myself 50 years from now, an old man looking back on this, and after many more of these things happening, like, is it really worth me putting in the effort into this argument? Is it worth me getting upset over this? Is it worth me letting this affect me? I think that's something that absolutely Stoicism encourages us to do, to look into the future and say, listen, this isn't very important what we're arguing over here, or this isn't important what is happening right now. It's not going to affect you in the long run. But I love that analogy of the veteran.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I do think you see that naturally with a lot of veterans, and I do think part of Stoicism is letting go of the temptation to get very upset about small things, because, as you say, in the long run, you can think about how you think about things that seemed like a big deal some years ago, and they don't make such a big deal now. But there is another side of this, right? So Stoicism can occasionally be criticized for creating too much of a sense of apathy. So if that sense you just described, that if you look at it years from now, who know the difference, that could make you apathetic about all sorts of things that you might think actually we want people to care about. And to me, the beauty of the veteran's perspective is the veteran's not apathetic. So as I say, if you go to a doctor who's had 5,000 patients before, the doctor is not going to freak out or get emotional about what you bring, because the doctor is too experienced for that. But the doctor is not apathetic at all. If the doctor is any good, the doctor will be professional, very committed, care a lot. Same thing with a lawyer. So what I'm saying is the lawyer would not necessarily give up on the argument or say it's not worth arguing about. There might be a very important argument. You might have a lawyer who spends an entire lifetime trying to correct injustice, but it's the spirit in which they do it. They engage in the argument. They care about it. They're committed to it. But on the other hand, they don't get swept off with emotion or rage or whatever the reaction might be of a newcomer, because they've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
So you think about somebody who's deeply involved in a career of dealing with certain kinds of injustices or certain kinds of medical problems. They bring great commitment to it, and there's no apathy about it at all in that sense. But what there is a certain level of detachment that prevents them from losing their sense of equilibrium or having it spoil their judgment. And I think that's the Stoic balance as I see it.
No, I love that. And, I kind of think of something that I've been teaching my coaching clients lately, which has been, for me, something that I've found that Stoicism has created within me is I'm unsurprised by the happenings of life, which is kind of what we're talking about here. Like nothing is surprising, because we recognize that certain things are going to happen. But I'm also very interested in what's happening. No matter what happens, I'm interested in figuring out, okay, what's happening? How can I make the best out of this? If it's bad, why is it bad? If it's good, why is it good? And how can we move forward in the best possible way here? Life is interesting to me, but it's unsurprising, and I think it's a really beautiful mix. It's just something that I've noticed.
Yes, I agree. And there's in the chapter the book has on perspective talks about that a lot, that the Stoic isn't easily surprised, because once you spend a lot of time looking at life from a certain point of view, you realize that a lot of the patterns that trouble us are patterns that have been around forever, and they repeat. They change masks, they change the form they take. But I think Marcus Aurelius says once you've lived for a certain number of years, there's no point in living 40 years as good as living 10,000, because there's nothing more to see. You're going to see the same things in a lot of different ways. But once you understand human nature and you understand the problems that it brings about, you have the idea, and you're unlikely to be very shocked by much of anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And this next question that I kind of wanted to move into this might be a big jump from here, but, as a person who's had a career in law, do you think that there are any aspects of Stoicism that should influence public policy in our modern society?
Well, probably not, but I wouldn't argue out with somebody else who thought there were. I think part of the beauty of Stoicism is that it is a general framework, and it's compatible with a very wide range of opinions people might hold about other things. So I think that liberals and conservatives can benefit from Stoicism just the same. And if it weren't that way, it wouldn't be so enduring. I mean, it's astonishing that anything anybody said 2,000 years ago is still useful. And if it is that useful, it must be because it's so adaptable to so many things. Part of what's interesting about Stoicism, I'm sure you'll agree, is you read these things and you can think, wow, it's as if they're talking about me. It applies to my life so squarely. And then you realize, yeah, everybody thinks that.
Yeah.
Including people whose lives are nothing like yours at all. I mean, including ancient Romans whose lives don't resemble your life at all. They thought the same thing. They thought, what a fine fit this is. And every now and then you get little glimpses of the difference where Seneca will say something like, look at the idiotic things. These are the things for which we wear our togas threadbare. And you're thinking, well, yeah, okay, so it's not directly applicable in that way. But I think that Stoicism provides generalities of how to think about problems in the world that I think are compatible with a very wide range of other priors people might hold. So I can imagine somebody saying that what Stoicism suggests as a matter of politics is leaving people more to be self-reliant or something like that. You wouldn't hear me saying that. I think that the philosophy addresses issues that are just sort of prior and different from political questions.
Yeah, well, I think that's one thing that has been so interesting to me as well about Stoicism is that if you go and look at groups of people who are talking about Stoicism, like there are people in every spectrum of life, in every political belief, even in every religious belief.
Right.
It's kind of like a chameleon philosophy. It can really fit with anything.
Exactly.
It's a blessing and a curse because it can help so many people, but it can also create a divide within Stoicism, where you have got people on the left and the right in America who both believe that Stoicism is so closely aligned with their political beliefs, and it does create this divide, and it can be disappointing sometimes, but it is a blessing as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's as you say that I think the interesting feature of the philosophy is it can be adapted to different circumstances and different pre-existing intellectual commitments somebody might have. So as you say, somebody reads it and says, "That's it. That's exactly what I've always thought," and it perfectly squares with my politics. And then so does somebody on the other side, and they're both surprised to discover that anybody who has the opposite politics could still subscribe to all these views just as they do. But I do think that's how it works.
Absolutely. And look, Ward, I want to be respectful of your time. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I guess I just want to re-emphasize to people that I've been looking at this book lately, and the Practicing Stoic. I'm so excited for you to release this. And it's already been so helpful to me in my study of Stoicism. When's the book coming out? What's your goals with this book? What would you like people to do? Because I want to send as many people over to get this book as possible, because it really it's an incredible work what you've done, and I can tell that you put so much effort into this. Where can people go?
That's very nice. It'll be out, I think, middle of June, available at Amazon and from the publisher, David Godine. And I just hope that you have listeners who find it helpful to them. I mean, I wrote it because it was the kind of book that I wanted but couldn't quite find, where it emphasized, because I would read the original Stoics, and I think, hasn't somebody taken what they all said and sort of systematized it and rounded it up so you could compare easily what they all had to say about the same topics, things like that. It really has two audiences. One is somebody who's just getting into Stoicism and wants lessons, but would prefer to have the lessons from the original authors rather than from moderns. And then the other is people who already know that they like Stoicism, they've spent a lot of time with it. For them, I'd hope the book could serve as a reference. So if you're saying, well, lately I've been thinking about this aspect of Stoicism, maybe I've been thinking about the Stoic view of a certain kind of adversity or of anger, of fear, the book allows you to just pick a topic like that and look it up and just see immediately, well, here's what they said about it, and here's what here's what each of them said about it, and here's how it compares. And so my hope is it's got something useful for many different kinds of students of Stoicism, but we shall see. Anyway, the book's available soon.
Yeah, awesome. And can people pre-order the book?
Yeah, the book's available for pre-order now, and as I say, I think it'll ship second week of June.
Wonderful. I'm looking forward to that, even though I already have a copy. But I'm really looking forward to people actually reading that, and I know we're going to get some really good feedback on that. Absolutely. I guess, where else can people go to follow you? Are you on Twitter, Instagram? Maybe not Instagram, but like Facebook, or where can people follow you?
Well, I admit I'm not sure it's for Stoic reasons or otherwise, but I'm not big on social media.
Great.
I do have a website, wardfarnsworth.com, which has information about this book and about the other projects that I mentioned, and one or two I haven't mentioned. I write about a wide range of things, and if somebody likes this book, there's some chance they might like some of the others, because the format tends to be very similar. I'm very long on systemizing knowledge and trying to teach with examples. But unfortunately, fortunately or otherwise, you won't at this point find me on Twitter. But if people like the book, there's some other books they might like.
Wonderful. Well, I'll have all of the links to where you can buy the book and where you can go to follow yourself in the show notes. But Ward, I'm really looking forward to future conversations. I want to have you back on the podcast as soon as possible. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. And is there anything else you want to say to the audience before we head off?
No, just thanks to you, Simon, and keep up the great work with the podcast.
I will do. Thank you so much. Ciao.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right, so there you have it, my interview with Ward Farnsworth. As I said at the start of the show and many times throughout the interview, I really do hope that you guys go out and pre-order this book, because it's already such an incredible resource for me in my life and my study of Stoicism. And, it really aligns with this podcast too. It's called The Practicing Stoic. It's all about how to use Stoicism practically in your life right now, today. So I'll include all of the links to where you can get that in the show notes. I'll include all of the websites that Ward mentioned. And apart from that, I really hope that this interview has been valuable to you. I know it certainly has been to me, and I've learned so much from Ward and his study of Stoicism. But look, I'll talk to you guys next time. But until then, I hope that this episode has helped you on your rise to the good life. Ciao. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practical Stoic Podcast. I hope it's been valuable for you. And if you'd like to support the show, then you can go to patreon.com/Simon Drew. If you'd like to try mindset coaching with me, then you can book your first free consultation by going to risetothegoodlife.com/coaching. To join the community, just go to Facebook and search for the Practical Stoic Mastermind. The links to all of these places are included in the show notes, but for now, this is Simon Drew signing out.